So here's something I find really, really cool, and I'm really excited to share it with you. In the book of Isaiah, which for those of you who have listened for a while now, you probably know that I have been going verse by verse, chapter by chapter through the book of Isaiah in my own personal study. And so we've had a lot of videos kind of on this book, and it's really great. I love it. I was nervous going into it because it's massive and there's so much in there, and I thought, how am I ever going to navigate it? But I've just taken it slow, and it's actually been a really great study, although it has at times gotten a little bit heavy because there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of archaic language, a lot of judgment language. So I'm really loving it. There is so much more in here than I really expected or knew fully going into it, but it's been a wonderful study that I've really appreciated, and several Truth Be Told episodes have come out of it, so that's been really cool as well. But in chapter 53, we get this really awesome prophecy that I just want to talk about a little bit. And something that struck me as I went through this is the language tense that is used by Isaiah in writing this down. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. How could tense be that important? But it really is. And it also kind of makes me have more questions about how prophecy worked. Like, how was God delivering certain prophecy or certain words to the prophets? We're going to get into all that. It shouldn't be too long an episode, even though that seems like a big topic. But first, I want to just start by reading Isaiah 53. Verse 1, "Who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth." Verse 10, "Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." So that is chapter 53. It's not very often on Truth Be Told that I'm reading entire sections, but what I find so cool about this chapter, first of all, is that this is such a pointed prophecy about Jesus Christ. If I were to read this prior to the events of Jesus' life and death, and were really wanting to fabricate the coming of Messiah, I don't know that I would have chosen the actual events that happened to Jesus, and yet they fit it so perfectly. And this is an accusation that often gets leveled against Christianity at large, is, the apostles just looked at the prophecies in Isaiah or in the Psalms and just kind of like wrote a story that fit all these things. I think this is an amazing claim because if I were to read this and start to write a story that fit all of these things, first of all, the fact that it was done across many different people writing the New Testament and it's all in harmony, I think that's amazing. But if I were to, even on my own, not collaborating with other people, which makes it highly more complicated, if I were to sit down and say, I'm going to write a story that fulfills all this prophecy, I'm just going to make it up, I never would have done some of the things that happened in the gospel narratives. And yet, when you read them, you realize, man, that is so specific and can only be a fulfillment of what was written hundreds and hundreds of years later in Isaiah's time. And I want to emphasize this because I really love if atheists and skeptics would truly take a look at this, and Jewish people for that matter who don't recognize Jesus as Messiah. I want you to look at this section really critically and think, if you were to construct a narrative that fulfilled this as prophecy, really be honest with yourself. Would it have looked like Jesus Christ's life, death, and resurrection that we find in the gospel accounts? You probably would have written something slightly different. And yet, the specifics of what happens in the gospel narratives fits this to a T. And I think that is just incredible proof for the validity of what Jesus actually did while he was here on the earth. But this other thing that I want to draw our attention to, like I said before, is the tense of this whole chapter. And what I mean by tense is like past tense, future tense, present tense. What is being written here and how is it being written? I think it's really interesting. At first, Isaiah starts out, who has believed what he has heard from us, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? So he's just asking this general question to those listening to the prophecy. And then in verse 2, for he grew up before him like a young plant. So this is past tense, as this has already happened, For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him. He was despised and rejected by men. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs. The real emphasis I want to put here is that Isaiah is writing as if this has already taken place. And we know historically this hasn't taken place, and yet the tense is as if it's already done. And I think this shows the certainty of this prophecy, that Isaiah is seeing it as if it's already a done deal. Now, what he saw, how he saw it, that I don't know. And this is why it brings up questions about how is prophecy delivered to the prophets, Were they seeing it like a vision and writing it down? Did God just speak words to them and then the way they wrote them down might have like changed the tense? Like, they wanted to kind of preserve it for their people. And so when God says, he will be, did Isaiah just change the tense to he was? Like, I don't really know how that happened. Sometimes we do that in our own modern world where someone will tell us something. Let's say someone tells you a story and they say, so I'm going to the store, right? And someone else says, what did he say? And you say, he went to the store. You just changed the tense without even realizing that you did it. But this is all in how we receive information and then deliver it to other people in order to make it make sense for them. So it makes me wonder about prophecy and how it was received versus delivered. I think that's all really interesting, but kind of a side point. But what I really, really love about this is that Isaiah is writing this as if it's a certainty, as if it's already been done. And this really pairs well with what the Bible says about Jesus being slain before the foundations of the world. That was a done deal. That was already part of the plan. It was a point in history or in the future that was going to become history no matter what. That was coming. And Isaiah writes as if it's basically as good as done. So this whole chapter, for the most part, is very much past tense until we get to verse 10. It says, yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. Okay, so that part again is past tense. But in the second half of this verse, when his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. And it continues like this. And I think the beauty of this being future tense is that there is still so much fulfillment to happen, in the sense that, yes, after he was raised from death, he did see a partial fulfillment. He did see people coming into the church by virtue of the reception of his Holy Spirit, but there is still more work to be done on the earth until that day when he finally returns and he sees it done in full while he rules on the earth during his millennial reign. And I think that is really, really cool, because we can, not only does Isaiah write in a way where reading this actually makes more sense for our time after Jesus Christ has been crucified and has risen from death. So he kind of writes a prophecy that's meant to be read at our time in history, which I think is really, really cool. I mean, this would have made sense to the Jews who were questioning it and discussing it for centuries. It would have made sense to them, but it would have read a little bit differently when they're realizing it's something that hasn't happened but is being written of as if it has happened. Whereas us reading this chapter can read it in such a new light because Isaiah wrote it in such a way that really those who have lived after the death and resurrection of Christ are really reading it in its fulfillment. Like the tense itself points to the time of fulfillment. We can read this after he has done these things. So we can read it in past tense while also standing at this crucial time in history where there's still more to be fulfilled, where there is still more to be added to his body, where there is still, as it says here, many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. So he's already borne the iniquities of those who have accepted him, but there are more to be told this good news to who will also have their iniquities borne by him, as one born out of time, as Paul puts it, which I think is a really cool phrasing as well. So I think this prophecy is awesome. Hopefully this lets us read it with a new light, read it with a new appreciation, because it really seems to be written for the Jewish people that Isaiah was writing to, and yes, to all people that this has been preserved for, but we are in a unique point in history where we can read this and the tense actually makes sense. And so it's so cool that even in the language chosen, Isaiah seems to be writing this prophecy for people who are living in the time between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ, and that is us. So a really cool instance of the Bible not only being written for us, but kind of written to us. And I think that's really cool because so often the Bible is written to a specific people, and we still don't want to discount that context at all. But there are certain moments where it seems like the author steps out of time and speaks directly into our present time. And that's a moment that's happening here in the book of Isaiah. And I find that fascinating and encouraging, and hope you do too.